Coming up, the Brooklyn Nets once again find themselves at a critical point of their franchise, and Sean Marks will be at the helm. However, does he have the fortitude to do things the right way? And in fact, is there a right path? We dive in coming up next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. Over there, you'll find Doug Norrie. I'm Adam Armbrecht. We thank you, as always, for making us your first listen of the day. We are 100% free on all those great platforms. And let you know, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. And Doug, where we get started is a familiar place for this franchise. Maybe not when we thought we'd be here right now, about 2 weeks out from the trade deadline. But Sean Marks has, again, a critical set of decisions to make that are going to determine the next, 5 to 10 years, potentially, of this franchise?
Well, once more into the breach, dear friends. We're here again. Sean Marks.
Riddled with just wounds all over our bodies. One more time. Let's do it.
I think it worked out for King Henry's folks, or Edward, or whichever king was there. Okay, so we are here again with the Nets. We're looming on 3 weeks away. No, 2.5 weeks until the trade deadline. And the Nets are at an incredible tipping point, I think, with like where the franchise is going, is headed, is now, obviously, and sort of like what needs to be done. And the hilarious thing, and hilarious is probably in quotes, is that the Nets have found themselves in a very similar situation in the past, with that Sean Marks guided them through. The situation now is actually not dissimilar in a lot of ways. And where I think we would all agree the first time around, he did it really well, like navigated them out. And we'll go through some of the steps here, like specifically of sort of like what happened with Marks when he first took over the job. Navigated it probably as good as you can actually do it, to be honest with you, given a totally impossible task of when where the Nets were when he took over the team. And now the parallels are like nearly 1-to-1, except the difference now is it's sort of a problem of his own creation. And there's a worry, I think, now that when the chips are really having to be pushed in or taken out, whatever metaphor you want to use here, that Marks is going to view the situation different because he was the one that pushed the initial button. Billy King did it before, and Marks was there to clean up the mess.
Right
now, the mess has to be cleaned up, but he's the one who dumpstered the stuff out of the fridge. And I don't know if he's going to have the same sort of like devil may care attitude toward it.
Well, sometimes the easiest or the best person to clean up a mess is the one that made it, right? He knows exactly where the mess is. I go right over here and I clean up that mess. I walk over to the living room, another mess. I made that. I can get this done. I do think it's interesting before we get into the coming out of the Billy King era and the Boston trade and where that set up Sean Marks to be able to kind of say, hey, it's going to be a lot of hard decisions, but they're maybe easy for me, right? Because I'm the new guy coming in the door. I wonder... I like to think maybe, just as setting as like my premise here, is that maybe Sean Marks has the same attitude, generally speaking, because even though it wasn't his mess with Billy King, you could still say it was hard to do, though. It was hard to say, we're going to go ahead and dumpster this thing. We're going to have multiple seasons where we don't win a lot of games, especially in an era for sports where GMs don't survive long outside of Sean Marks. Sean Marks is Teflon. He goes nowhere, right? So there's at least something there. You had to have some level of fortitude. Now, though, it's going to be ratcheted up to a whole nother level. I 100% agree.
Yeah, look, if you're Bayesian this thing, you use your priors, you're like, okay, he did it once. So he gets aided with that, right? If you're making a predictions about what he's going to do, he is helped by the fact that he has done it once. Many GMs would not have the intestinal fortitude to do it once. And what we're talking about is, obviously coming out of the Billy King era, the Nets had traded 3 firsts and a swap and like Gerald Wallace and some other stuff for the Paul Pierce and Kevin Garnett package, which obviously like sort of flames out in pretty spectacular fashion. Pierce doesn't resign and they end up trading KG back to Minnesota, and the Nets are sort of left holding the bag because the team stinks. And Boston has all the picks. Billy King's out. Marks comes in the winter of 2016, and basically takes a very clear long-term approach to it, which is, and I'm not going to go through every move here, but highlighted by sort of buying on other teams' distressed assets, trying to get draft capital along with it, getting expirings in the door and then out the door, right? Like Timothy Mozgov and getting D'Angelo Russell as a rehab project attached to it, right? Trading, and they shipped out Brooke Lopez and the rights to Kuzma and that, and then also dealing Thaddeus Young, you get back a pick which ends up becoming, I think, LeVert. And they did another deal which ends up becoming Jared Allen. I'll get that. I lost track of that one here, but regardless, it was a very clear process, right? It was like, here's what we're going to be doing. We're going to take your trash. We'll make it into like partly a treasure. We'll save money in the process. We'll recoup draft capital. We are going to lose a ton. Those Boston picks became essentially Tatum. You know what I mean? Because they ended up packaging it together and moving up to get Tatum. Like, that's a tough look. But it was like the only way out. And it worked, right? 4 years later or 3 years later, they signed Kyrie and KD because they have enough cap space and they have the ammo to do it. So long story short, not running through every single Sean Marks deal. There's lots of other, like, picking off really good talent along the way, Dinwiddie and stuff, Joe Harris. But like, that was the path. It was and it took a steady hand to do it. But do you think now that he's the one that traded these draft picks to Houston and now has to watch, maybe in horror, the idea of these becoming like lottery picks again, and now you did it? Like, I guess that's the question we're trying to raise here, is like, does Marks have the ability to not see that as part of the equation?
Yeah, and I think that's probably the question that we don't have a pure answer to. Meaning, Sean Marks coming into this year after the trades looked at Mikal Bridges and Cameron Johnson and the veterans, Dorian Finney-Smith, Royce O'Neal, Spencer Dinwiddie, all these guys, right? We know this. And we thought we're being sold, we're going to be competitive, about a 500 team, right? Make the play-in tournament, maybe sneaking as the 8th seed. Okay, like, that's the agenda, that's the goal. If secretly Sean Marks was like, we're selling a bit of a half bag full of apples here, right? Because this thing is not going to be that successful. We want Cam Thomas to continue to develop contention there. Certainly, we still believe in Day'Ron Sharpe. That was a narrative in the offseason, right? So you can point to a lot of and then we draft, we have 2 first-round picks. We bring in longer-term prospects that actually could inform their real opinion about the short-term outlook for this team. So if, in his honest opinion, and Joe Tsai's as well, they knew that it was going to look closer to the way it is right now than being a 500 team, then I think he could have the fortitude. Then he has the conviction, because he already knew this was year number 1 of being really bad and losing a lot of basketball games. If it's the other way, that what he was selling publicly is what he actually believed in, then you're in a hard spot. Then you can't do the full tear. Then you're going to have a harder time acknowledging that, because it means you made dramatic and serious missteps. And that is probably the next piece that we'll get into here coming up in a second. What are some of the successes he had in that past run? And how much, by the way, is he influenced by looking at Houston and seeing how those picks are valuing as we move forward? We'll get into that in just 1 second.
All right, before we get to that, I'll tell you about our friends over at FanDuel. Look, NFL season in the middle of the playoff, really exciting playoffs so far. Obviously, NBA season, we're in the thick of it. No better time to get on the action. Then with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, new customers are going to get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. Love to hear that. When you place just a $5 bet, what happens with that $5 bet? Win or lose, doesn't matter. You're getting the $150 in bonus bets, no matter what. The app for FanDuel is so easy to use. I'm on there every single night. Live same game parlays. You can find the bets in the Explore tab, which makes it really easy to search for stuff. Parlays in the Parlay Hub. You'll see what other people are putting in those popular parlays. So much more. I love getting into the player props every night. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to make your first bet a layup. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL.
So as we continue the exciting and optimistic outlook at what could be coming next for the Brooklyn Nets with Sean Marks at the helm, we actually remind you about another little thing that's been going on for Doug Norrie and myself, because this type of discussion got us thinking about other critical moments in the Nets franchise history. If you go over to wegotnets.com right now, you can sign up for a free email subscription that's going to send you out key pieces of Nets history, that every fan just needs to know, right? From the end of the super team, very recent, to the Jason Kidd era and what that meant for this franchise, all the way down into some of the early days, including Kevin Porter's record-breaking game. There's a lot of fun moments, even if the current feels a little bit more pessimistic than optimistic. So get over to WeGotNets.com, sign up with your email, and it'll also keep you in the loop for some other exciting stuff that we're going to be bringing to you as we continue to move through the season. That being the case, Doug, the one thing here that you mentioned at the top was including the Houston picks. If Sean Marks thought that this was going to be kind of a disaster and he went into that willingly, then that feels even maybe a little more egregious to have made that trade. The problem here maybe is that, do you think that Sean Marks should be willing to look at the value increase of those picks that Houston now controls and say, because those are raising in value, I am going to pivot from my rebuild structure and say, no, actually, we're going to go get DeJounte Murray. We're going to go ahead and add pieces because we can't afford to let these guys end up with high value assets. I personally think that's a mistake because they're gone now. So why spend your time trying to, reconstruct past decisions?
It's the hardest thing to ever do. And it's a no-brainer. You cannot look at those. There's no world where you can look at those picks and have them influence your decision. Right. I know that it's really hard and the dissonance around it is really tough. And it's impossible to get by. Like, it's like when you make a bad investment, watching the stock ticker every single time after you sell, thinking about it. We've all been down this, right? Like, name an asset class or something that you bought where you feel regret about it and you kind of wish for something else to happen, even though the ship is totally sailed, right? You cannot look at those Houston picks and have them inform it. Now, I think we went into the season thinking that it would be, and I think it for sure has, by the way, influence the decision about how they're going to play this because you don't have their own picks, that you want to sell something more to the fans. You try to win games a little bit more. There's no reason to tank, yada, yada, yada. We've been through all the sort of reasons behind this. But at the end of the day, you cannot, as Sean Marks or this organization, look at those picks and have them influence your decision. You don't own them. It's useless. It's like trying to make a new investment based on the old price of a stock. It's gone. You don't get to buy. You don't get to buy at the old price. It's over. I know it feels like crap, and it's not fun to look at, but you just have to move on from it. And so I think, it'd be impossible. It's just it seems so clear that they are influenced by it. Now, look, you also have to sell tickets. You have to sell season ticket holder stuff, and you have to sell your players like Mikal Bridges and Cam Johnson that you're trying here. There's other considerations. I'm throwing him in there because he just signed them. There's other considerations here besides just this one thing, because maybe some of these other guys aren't going to want to lose every night, but which, by the way, they kind of are anyway. Right. But long story short, you cannot look at these picks at all and have them in any way inform what you do unless it was trading to get them back, which they're not going to do, right? There's no way. You can't do it. You can't. You have it's malpractice if you do. That's the only.
Go ahead.
That's it. I'm sorry. I'm getting heated. I'm getting flustered here.
No, but by the way, the track record here tells you you don't need to be. So we talk about, go back to the 16-17 season. They're 20-62. 2017-18. They're 28-54. 2018-19. They're a 42-40 team. It's exciting. You have that little run, and then you move into that next era, right? You're able to attract 2019. 2020 is the shortened season, obviously 35-37, but you moved forward, right? We've referenced sometimes Oklahoma City, right? The Thunder is being, hey, you see how quickly you could turn this thing over and back around. The Nets, Sean Marks can see it was only 2 years later that he's able to turn around and attract superstars and start to reconstruct this thing 3 seasons later. And now, do they still have the same cachet when it comes to superstars? That could be debatable, right? Are you going to be able to land those guys a year from now when you clear off Ben Simmons' money? Probably not, right? That's going to look different. But the other part of this then, though, is looking at after you sacrificed all that stuff from Billy King and what you didn't have to work with, it's also worth remembering that the Brooklyn Nets, this past draft, we know they have Clowney, they have Jared Wilson, they have Derek White, had Jalen Wilson, in the wings there kind of developing. Well, they got Cam Thomas with the 27th pick, right? They got, Sadiq Bey, who ended up going on to play elsewhere, but he was a 19th overall selection, a valuable asset that turned into other things. In the second round, the 31st pick, Nicholas Claxton going back here. Jared Allen, 22nd overall. Now, some of those are first-round picks, back end. You've already proven that you can go find talent, right? And that doesn't even count going and getting Spencer Dinwiddie, going and getting Joe Harris, going and getting Bruce Brown, right? All of these moves that you've made.
Lonnie Walker, Dennis Smith Jr.
Right now. Lonnie Walker right now. Dennis Smith Jr. right now. Trendon Watford right now. Harry Giles now. But you know what I mean? You have all of these moves for all the mistakes, and he's made mistakes, as every GM does. And we've often said this about Sean Marks. He's made some really great moves. The problem is his misses or mistakes have been on arguably the most highest level and epic of scales. but he has all the cachet in his pocket to say, like, I've done this. So why get flustered by what you're going to, win or lose here in the Houston picks or any narrative around you? You've done it. So if I have a belief in myself and I'm Sean Marks, I look at this and go, listen, it's not going to be great for a couple of years, but that's okay. We can maybe afford to make some tougher decisions around key players in the short term.
Yeah, and it's actually, as you were saying, and you did a good like sort of running list of like the good moves he made. They drafted over slot, like, or they've ended up over slotted these draft picks like time and time again.
I skipped
right?
Daron
These
Trucker
guys
for some reason as well.
Exactly. Another one, right? Another one. All these guys, if you redrafted now, every single one of those guys goes higher for sure.
Yeah.
Like significantly higher. And the other thing to remember too, if you want to use the analog of the Celtics thing, is that, yeah, it's a super pain point in the moment. It's hard to watch a potential lottery pick go to the hands of someone else because of a mistake you made. That stinks. You can also in some ways take solace in that, like, hey, like, those picks became like Tatum, who's one of the best players. Nobody cares anymore. No one references that anymore as like the Nets getting the Celtics Tatum. Like
Right.
Nets fans kind of remember, I think, but I don't think anyone looks at like that situation with just like, and gets really flustered by it because, time heals wounds like that. Like you can just get past it and you will just, it'll get lost in the course of history around like every little move that got a player in a certain way. And if you can sort of adhere to the idea that people will just move on and you need to take some short-term pain here, like, I think like that is, and again, it's impossible. This is really hard. Like this is the hardest part of being a human is this kind of thought process. It really is like, getting out of your own way on stuff like this is probably the hardest human trait that really sets people back. And if you can just take the 1,000-foot view, it's like so obvious what they should do. That like that it's not even, it's actually comical. It's so obvious. And but I think the 1,000-foot view part is the part that gets lost.
And interact with us on this one because like when you mentioned, I don't think, fans obviously remember it, right? But like they move beyond it. And I think it's interesting to wonder about, well, if you never get to the place where you land Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant and James Harden and you offer up this new possible moment of ultimate success, that also helps shift the perspective too, right? Okay, previous GM totally boondoggled this thing. And the big move that he made never amounted to a hill of beans. Now, from a success standpoint, neither did the Sean Marks iteration. But the fact that you can say, listen, 3 years from now, to your point, right? It's all results oriented. By the way, look at this season. Nets winning game start of the year, 13-10, right above 500. We're going, hey, this can be something. The Nets have something that they can kind of anchor themselves in for a couple of seasons. When you go ahead and lose a ton of basketball games, right, and all these questions start to bubble up, then you start to, again, then you trigger. It's 100% trigger. It's a triggering moment. Hey, we're starting to lose basketball games here. Are we about to tailspin back into 20-win seasons, right? Are we on that doorstep? I think it all has to be anchored in perspective. And before we talk about the short-term decisions they have to make, the one last thing I want to ask you quickly here is, from a Sean, do you think at any point a GM, because I think the Rangers did this a couple of years ago in hockey, they came out and said, hey guys, fan base, we're going to struggle. The next couple of years are going to be rough, but it's with the intention of getting to the ultimate goal of being back and being competitive. Can you ever see Sean Marks like in the Nets just coming out and saying that, like, hey,
no,
the era, the KD Kyrie era ended. We know this isn't perfect, but we have an agenda. We just, we got to keep kind of towing the company line until we get there.
I think they probably had a chance to do it right after the KD trade.
Yep.
Yeah, like right after it. And you probably, if you were doing some optic stuff, you could have laid it right at the feet of those guys. Like right. If you wanted to. Now, I don't think you should have done it necessarily, but you could have laid it at the feet of Harden and Kyrie and KD if you wanted to. I don't think they're not that kind of organization, so I don't think they should have. But I think that was probably the chance to do it. And I do think the part where you are selling these other guys on something like Bridges, right? Like about like, hey, we like that. I think they like having him in the face of the franchise. Like he's a good dude. He's good, right? Like I think that probably does factor in. I don't think they really had that before where I think it was like so understood what they were doing that they probably didn't even have to come out and say it. Now,
explain, right?
The situation is just a little different here, especially with the guys that are in the door. Because like think about that. You say that, and then you maybe have Mikal Bridges asking for a trade because like I don't want to be part of some crap team, and maybe he'd be correct. I don't know. So go ahead.
And and that's actually that's what's gonna bring us to come up here in a second. The short-term decisions that they're gonna make. There are 7 players that are currently on expiring contracts. That's the first and foremost that they need to sort out. Does it rise even higher to every single player on this roster? We'll get into that in just one second.
All right, before we get to that, I'll tell you about our friends over at Prize Picks. Basketball season, no better time to get on a Prize Picks than that during NBA. That's because all you're doing on Prize Picks, you're going more or less on the Prize Picks projections. You're not wrangling with salaries. You're not going up against sharks in the water. You're just going more or less, and all those stats you love too. It's like, points, rebounds, assists, blocks, steals. You're going more or less. You're putting 2 to 5 of those combinations together. You can win up to 25 times your money. Not just basketball too. You can go over to combine some stuff with NFL. Also, Prize Picks is just figured daily fantasy out, took all the fun parts, eliminated the kind of annoying and sort of more difficult parts to it, and just gave you something that's really, really easy to use, an app that's super safe and just a lot of fun every single night. All you got to do is go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA. You use the code LockedOnNBA. You're going to get first deposit match up to $100. That's prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA. Use the code LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks, daily fantasy sports made easy.
All right, so as we wrap up the crossroads, once again, wouldn't you know it, for the Brooklyn Nets with Sean Marks at the helm, and whether or not he has the potential fortitude to make the right decision. Let's talk about what the right decisions are. As we head towards the trade deadline, the Brooklyn Nets have 7 players, as I mentioned, that are on expiring deals. Now, chief among them is Spencer Dinwiddie, Royce O'Neal, Nicholas Claxton, right? Experienced guys that have been around. Then you have the flyer players that Sean Marks brought in this season on 1-year deals in Dennis Smith Jr., Lonnie Walker, and also Trendon Watford. I'm putting just those players underneath this list. I'm not going to include Harry Giles because I don't think he has any future here. When you look at that group of players, which agenda do you think he should be serving in terms of the decisions he makes? Are you already locked in on Dennis Smith Jr. and Lonnie Walker as being long-term players for this team? So, hey, we're going to get contracts. Don't worry about it. Or flip it the other way, and we'll go up to the veterans after this, but I think these guys are a little more interesting in the moment. Say, hey, they got tremendous value right now. Who wants to come get one of these guys to add to your playoff run team and hopefully turn them into a couple more draft assets that we can utilize as we see fit?
Yeah, so I think it's obvious that Dinwiddie should be traded here, and Royce O'Neal should be traded. They're on the north side of 30, and I just don't know what what the point would be. You're not going to re-sign them almost for sure. Not, at some point you need to have a roster, right? So you need to have players, but I think those guys for sure should be traded. And I would probably take, maybe lower than what you think is correct on it, just to make sure they don't lose them for nothing, right? That's a troubling, the Seth Curry, Seth Curry, he was hurt. Harris was hurt. I get it. But Curry more specifically because he was expiring. These guys were hurt, and it's harder to trade in that scenario. These guys are just not hurt right now. They have to be traded.
And even Royce O'Neal last year, by the way, a year and a half left on his contract. You still could have made that decision then, which would have given more value to another team.
And if it's a second, it's a second. At this point, you just have to get something for these guys. Letting them walk for nothing with where they are with draft capital would be a problem. And if it's lower than you think, I'll throw Dorian Finney-Smith. I'm sure you're going to mention him. I'll throw Dorian Finney-Smith in there. I know the asking price seems to be stuck at 2 first-round picks. They didn't even use him to close the game against the Clippers in a game where they clearly needed him to guard Kawhi, right? Of all places. It was so obvious they needed him in there. He even closed. And you're going to go ask another team for 2 first-round picks for this guy? What are you doing? I love him, by the way. It's not a knock on him. It's just you can't say both things.
Oh, 100%.
So at this point, just trade him if you can get a first, that'd be great. They just have to move on from these guys. They're just not part of a long-term future almost no matter what.
And again, when him being Dorian Finney-Smith, a guy who's on multiple-year contract, but just to your point, age matters here, right? The value is clearly never going to really increase. Maybe there was a world that started the season last year, whatever. But as it stands right now, you're starting to move in different directions or try different closing lineups in games. He's not out there on the floor, so you're only diminishing that value. Nicholas Claxton would be the other one on the expiring deal. If you're not planning on bringing him back, though, my suspicion there, we'll talk about this way down the line, assuming he's here through the deadline, is that they're going to go into the summer and probably get him on an extension. It would be my opinion on that, not based on any reporting. But he's one where
the offer could get pretty substantial, maybe, right? He's playing well.
Right. That's the blow me away scenario, right?
And there's a couple teams that really, the Thunder have been mentioned a lot with him, not as a specific place, but probably just more as a good fit. I mean, we mentioned this, I think, first almost, but where if you were blown away with first round pick, I would really consider that too. Just because that's how desperately they need to retool here. Well, and I don't know. Go ahead. Sorry.
No. So, because in staying with the Fortitude, right? So right now, when you talk about, okay, does Sean Marks have the Fortitude? Well, moving on from Royce O'Neal, an expiring contract, right? Some of these guys, that's not really Fortitude. It should just be reasonable business, right? And you have your own young draft picks that would get some more playing time if you went in that direction. So pretty easy to kind of sell yourself and your fan base about what this is going to look like. But now if we move up the chain of command, like I got on with Matt George from Locked On Kings the other day, and it was purely hypothetical because his fan base is sniffing. They're excited. And he was like, hey, is there any world where the Nets would trade Mikal Bridges? And I said, no, they're not going to. But when he put up the offer, when we came to terms on the offer, you can't get Keegan Murray. Okay, fine. When it was 3 first-round picks and Kobe Jones and Kevin Huerter, my takeaway there was like, well, this enters. Is this offer, would you be doing, a little bit of malpractice here if you're Sean Marks and say, sorry, like we're not fielding offers here? I think at a certain point, especially with a team in the vein of the Kings who might not be the same caliber of team down the road, 2028, 2030, like certain teams come knocking. Fortitude to me is Sean Marks saying, if the offer is good enough, everyone's available. And that's where I don't think he has that fortitude, right? It stops short somewhere here. And that includes, by the way, a guy we don't talk about as much because he just hasn't been very good. And that's Cameron Johnson, right? Like there's a lot of guys that make a lot of money on this team that if the right offer came across your table, you should be willing to explore. And I think Sean Marks has a clear hierarchy of who is untouchable. And Dorian Finney-Smith, it seems like, is included in that group.
Yeah, I just don't know. And look, they've been very sort of tight-lipped at times, right? Like sometimes you don't know what's going to happen with this organization until it happens. Credit to them. Like they're able to kind of like leak stuff through Woj at times where they really want to. And otherwise this place is mostly a vault. Like they will surprise you with moves and then, or things just don't happen or whatever. They kind of hear about it after the fact. I agree with you. They should be open to hearing everything. Again, I know the part where they're trying to thread this needle, but it's really not a needle they can thread. I don't think. Like I actually don't think,
because they're losing basketball games. You're only threading a needle if you're playing 500 ball. You're losing every game. So at this point, like the cat's out of the bag. Mikal Bridges, and it's not even a knock on them. They are not playoff level group right now. You can tweak things, you can change things, you could bring in Murray. You're still not going to be a very good team. You're gonna be another move away after that as well, right? So that's the problem here.
You're right. Like there's really only so far your ceiling can go here. As long as Simmons is on the books here and not playing, he eats up so much of the cap. He doesn't play. Like that's already, we always leave him out now because he's just totally forgotten. This is actually one of the biggest problems. It probably is the biggest problem, honestly. It's like, is his contract.
And nothing? Yeah.
He gets totally off the hook in these conversations because like he's so forgotten at this point that like we just end up moving past it. It actually is the biggest problem. It's at 40+ million of zero basketball. Like almost no team can be good. There are teams that are able to do it. Sometimes on the hope that the guys are going to like come back and stuff and to be like their normal self, but there's not even that hope. So like when he's just doesn't play at that number, you are completely hamstrung. And actually really it's a shame that we got to the like 29-minute mark without mentioning this, but you also can't trade him. So you're just stuck with it too. Like you're stuck holding that bag all the way through it.
I have a whole other episode we could tease about a trade you make with Ben Simmons and another injured player around the NBA, but
the Australian League. Like I'm trying to think.
No, Lonzo Ball, man. They're listen, Chicago wants to move with that nice little injury protection on him. Come on, baby. Let's dance.
I don't even think they
it's only
would
2 years.
Anyway, point being, like they have so many of these problems that just inhibit their ability to get better, even moderately better in the short term. Like they have just so much dead money, no picks, that like you're just gonna have like even a DeJounte Murray move, let's say. Like, what does it really do for you, except for maybe cost you the precious capital you already have? This is just not. These aren't the moves.
And this actually, to me, is the other thing. So I think we're both in agreement that it's likely that Sean Marks may not make the significant move or may not make what feels like the prudent decision here, right? Hey, time to tear this thing down. And that's 3, 4, 5 guys going out the door here for whatever we can get. But the Ben Simmons piece, so we'll run just a hair long here on this. Remember, because he's on the books next year, like that's tragically, that's a reason to field offers on guys like Mikal or Cameron Johnson or anybody on this team, because that you're still going to be this wait and see away from, is he going to be an expiring deal? And then they'll say he has value at the trade deadline next season if he plays any games. Like, no, he doesn't. So you're just playing out that string. And actually, if you're Sean Marks and you want to make, again, wouldn't be totally accurate, but the case of, hey, this is why we're going to go this path. Because guess what? I didn't want to get rid of James Harden. He told me he wanted to go. Then I had to take something. The money had to match. I took Ben Simmons. I'm just waiting to get out from underneath this. This is my excuse to actually make some bolder decisions at the deadline, taking a lot of capital. Because I'm telling you, next year, young guys, right, playing, trying to get in the mix. That's what we're going to be about. And the following year later, we'll be that much closer to getting control of ourselves again. And you can start to craft that. You got a lot of money, even beyond Simmons, tied into a lot of players, whether they're good contracts or not. And the result, the product on the court, is a significantly below 500 team, right? This is the problem. The sale and the product and what you're telling people, none of these things merge accurately when you really take a step back.
Yeah, and look, and last final thought for me here is that you can't really say a lot of this stuff out loud because it does throw your own players under the bus. I know Sean Jacques Vaughn did it.
Well, I tell you one thing: some of these guys, I'd take a couple first right now for Mikal. Am I right, fellas?
Well, hilariously, Vaughn did it a couple weeks ago. He's like, "We have no all stars." It's like, hey, should we let the voting kind of finish before we say that? Like, I don't know, but like, I understand why you wouldn't.
We're not going to make it.
Yeah, like I understand why you wouldn't want to say the quiet part loud here as an organization because it sends the wrong thing to your players. But that's why as we get into the trade deadline, we'll kind of know what their thought process was. And I think like, the moves or non-moves will tell the whole process. All right, we're going to I'd love to hear what everyone thinks on this, by the way. Leave a comment over on Locked On Nets over on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe first, then leave a comment. Tell us what you think. Like, do you agree with some of the stuff that we broke down here where regards Marks, and like, what do you think he's going to end up doing? So make sure you subscribe over on Locked On Nets over on YouTube.
I've never been shy or secretive with the fact that if you walk into my life, you may be walking onto a record. That's Tay Swift.
Oh, one of the all-time great poets. We'll be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.
Basketball.